He was on his knees scrubbing a toilet when he heard them laughing about his daughter's grave. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, just kept the brush moving in slow circles, the chemical smell burning his eyes, while three men in $1,000 suits stood 12 feet away in the corridor and joked about how much the land would sell for once they tore the clinic down and buried her name with it. One of them said, and I want you to hear this clearly, one of them actually said, "Dead, women don't vote at board meetings." And the other two laughed. The man on his knees, the man holding the toilet brush, the man with the gray uniform and the name tag that said Sam. That man had a net worth of $4.3 billion. He was the one who built the clinic. He was her father. And every single person in that building was about to find out what happens when a billionaire decides that the most powerful thing he can do is disappear. Welcome to Echo Tales by Ken. I'm Ken. And if you are new here, this channel exists for one reason: to tell you stories about the people the world underestimates and the moment the world finds out exactly how wrong it was. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I want to see every single location in those comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now, because this story is only getting started and you are going to want to be here for every second of what comes next. Now, let's go back to where this really began. 13 months earlier. The funeral was on a Thursday. It rained. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of rain that arrives on cue in movies, but the quiet, relentless kind that soaks through everything and refuses to stop. The kind that feels personal. Arthur Vance stood at the graveside in a black suit that had been pressed that morning by hands that were not his own, holding an umbrella. He kept forgetting to open. The water ran down his face, and he didn't wipe it away. He couldn't tell anymore what was rain and what wasn't. Claire Elise Vance, 34 years old, daughter, friend, founder of the Meridian Community Health Clinic, gone in 11 days from a diagnosis that arrived too late and moved too fast for any amount of money or specialist or private jet to outrun. Arthur had spent 40 years learning that money could solve almost any problem. He had spent the last 11 days learning the one it couldn't. The eulogies were beautiful. People said true things, that Claire had her mother's warmth and her father's will, that she had turned down six-figure job offers to open a free clinic in a neighborhood the rest of the city had quietly given up on, that she knew the name of every patient who walked through the door and the name of every member of their family, that she had once spent her own birthday sitting with an elderly man who had no family because she didn't want him to be alone. All of it was true. Arthur had built towers that scraped the sky and deals that reshaped entire industries. Claire had built something he had never managed to build in 62 years of trying. She had built a place where people felt that they mattered. He stood at that graveside for a long time after everyone else had gone. His driver waited by the car without being asked. The rain didn't stop. When Arthur finally turned and walked away, he made himself a silent promise. The Meridian would stay open. Whatever it cost, whatever it took, it would stay open, it would carry her name, and the people who depended on it would never feel that weight lifted from underneath them. He believed, in that moment, that keeping that promise would be simple. He had no idea what was already being planned. The board of Meridian had been appointed by Arthur himself 3 years earlier, when Claire had come to him frustrated. The clinic had grown faster than she had expected. The administrative side was overwhelming her. Grant applications, compliance filings, donor relations, financial oversight. Arthur had offered to help her build a proper governance structure. She had let him, with the condition that she remain the final voice on anything that touched patient care. Arthur had agreed. He had assembled a board of 7, experienced people he trusted. He had written the charter himself, and in it he had included a standard clause, one that existed in virtually every nonprofit structure of this kind, that gave the board authority to make operational and financial decisions by majority vote. It was a standard clause. He had not thought twice about it. Donovan Marsh had been the board's elected chair since its formation. He was 56 years old, silver-tongued, and had run 3 successful healthcare management companies before Arthur brought him in. He had sat in the front row at Claire's funeral with his hands folded and his expression perfectly calibrated to the occasion. He had gripped Arthur's arm at the reception afterward and said, voice low and sincere, "She was one of the great ones, Arthur. We are going to honor her every single day." Arthur had thanked him. 22 days later, while Arthur was still barely leaving the house, still sitting in the dark with untouched whiskey, still waking at 4 in the morning staring at photographs, Donovan Marsh held a board meeting. Arthur was not invited. The meeting was not in the calendar that Marcus maintained. The agenda had one item. Marcus found it by accident. That was the part that would stay with Arthur for a long time afterward. Not the betrayal itself, but a randomness of how it surfaced. One mistyped email address. One assistant who paid close enough attention to recognize that a message chain about asset acquisition timelines and site clearing projections probably shouldn't have landed in his inbox. One young man who, instead of quietly deleting it and protecting his own position, picked up the phone at 4:47 in the morning because he believed his employer deserved to know. Arthur read the email chain 3 times at his desk without moving. The first time, he was looking for a misunderstanding, a different property, a different clinic, some context that would make the words mean something other than what they clearly meant. The second time, he was looking for a way to be angry at Marcus for waking him over something that turned out to be nothing. The third time, he just read it, slowly, every word. Donovan Marsh had been in contact with a real estate development group called Harwick Capital for at least 6 weeks. The emails were precise, professional, and completely without shame. They discussed the Meridian site, its square footage, its zoning classification, its proximity to a planned transit corridor that would make the land extraordinarily valuable within 3 years. They discussed projected sale figures. They discussed demolition timelines. One email from Marsh, dated 9 days after Claire's funeral, used the phrase "now that the founding obstacle had been resolved" to describe the fact that Claire was dead, now that the founding obstacle had been resolved. Arthur closed the laptop. He sat in the silence of his study for a very long time. He was not a man who cried easily. He had cried at Claire's graveside, and he had not cried since, and he would not cry now. What moved through him instead was something colder and more deliberate than grief, a feeling he recognized from the early years of his career, when he had been young and hungry, and someone more powerful had tried to take something from him, a feeling that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with clarity. He knew exactly what most men in a position would do next. They would call their attorneys. They would file injunctions. They would walk into that building the next morning with a legal team and a security detail, and they would end it in a single morning. Clean, fast, decisive, and Donovan Marsh would see them coming from a mile away. Marsh was not a stupid man. He was a careful man, a man who understood how powerful people moved, because he had spent 30 years moving among them. The moment Arthur appeared with lawyers, every document would vanish. Every email would be scrubbed. Every board member would lawyer up and claim they had voted in good faith based on information provided to them by the chair. The acquisition might collapse, but the men behind it would walk away clean. They would find another way, another angle, another vote. Arthur had not built $4 billion by winning battles. He had built it by winning wars. He needed evidence that couldn't be hidden. He needed to see what these people did when they believed no one important was watching. He needed to be in those rooms, the real rooms, the ones where performance stopped and the truth walked around without a suit on. He needed to be invisible. He picked up his phone and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in 3 years. Ray Kowalski had been Arthur's college roommate for 2 years before dropping out to build what eventually became the largest commercial building services company in the state. They had stayed close in a way that old friends do, rarely speaking, but always meaning it when they did. Ray was the kind of man who asked no unnecessary questions and answered the ones he was asked with complete honesty. Arthur called him at 6 in the morning. "I need a favor," Arthur said, "and I need you to forget I asked for it." Ray was quiet for a moment. "How long?" "Few weeks, maybe a month." "Which building?" "The Meridian, East Side." Another pause. "That's your daughter's clinic." "I know what it is." Ray didn't ask anything else. "I'll have something set up by end of week. You'll need a reference name. Something ordinary." Arthur thought for exactly 2 seconds. "Sam," he said. "Samuel Grant." 3 days later, a package arrived at Arthur's private residence. Not his main house, but the smaller apartment he kept across the city that almost nobody knew about. Inside, a laminated building services ID badge with a photograph that Marcus had somehow obtained without being asked how. A gray uniform in Arthur's size, pressed and folded. A name tag, steel-toed work boots, broken in enough that they wouldn't blister on the first shift. A printed schedule. Night shift, 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. starting Monday. Arthur held the name tag in his palm for a moment. Sam. He clipped it to the uniform. He reported for his first shift on a Monday evening in the third week of October. He took a cab, not a car service, not his driver, a regular cab, and walked the last 2 blocks on foot. The building supervisor, a compact, no-nonsense woman named Dorothea, who had clearly been briefed by Ray to ask no questions and expect no special treatment, handed him a cleaning cart without ceremony and pointed him toward the 3rd floor. Offices, corridor, 2 bathrooms, break room, she said. Cart stocked. Don't leave product residue on the glass partitions. It showed up on the last guy's performance review. Any questions? No, Arthur said. Good. She was already walking away. Clock out by 3. Arthur pushed the cart to the elevator. The doors closed. He looked at his reflection in the steel, gray uniform, name tag, cleaning cart. 62 years old. For $0.3 billion. A man his own executives would not recognize in this hallway. He pushed the cart onto the 3rd floor and got to work. The education began immediately. On his first night, Arthur encountered something he had not experienced in decades, complete and total invisibility. Not the polite invisibility of a man who is powerful enough that others don't want to stare. The other kind. The kind where you are present in a room and the people in it have simply decided, on a level below conscious thought, that you do not count. 2 executives were still in the office when Arthur arrived on the 3rd floor. A man and a woman, both in their 40s, both clearly running on the fumes of a long day. They were arguing, quietly but intensely, about budget projections. They did not pause when Arthur entered, did not lower their voices, did not acknowledge him in any way. He cleaned around them, emptying bins, wiping surfaces, moving the cart past their desks, and they spoke as freely as if he were part of furniture. He heard 3 things in that first hour that he filed carefully away. On his second night, he encountered Preston Holloway for the first time. Preston was 29 years old and held the title of Executive Operations Manager, a position that Arthur now understood had been created specifically to give Marsh a loyalist in the building with enough authority to move things without a paper trail. Preston was the kind of young man who had mistaken proximity to power for power itself, who wore the right clothes and said the right things, and had never once in his life been in a room where nobody cared who he was. Arthur was mopping the corridor outside the 2nd floor conference room when Preston came around the corner mid-conversation on his phone, walking fast, not looking. He nearly walked into the cart. He didn't apologize. He looked at the cart, then at Arthur, then back at his phone call, and snapped his fingers twice in Arthur's direction, the way you might signal a dog, gesturing for him to move the cart out of the way. Arthur moved the cart. Preston walked past without breaking stride. Arthur watched him go. He had fired men for less. He had walked out of deals over less. He had spent his entire adult life in rooms where that kind of gesture would have been unthinkable toward anyone. Because Arthur Vance had always believed that how you treat people who can do nothing for you is the only character test that matters. He filed Preston Holloway away very carefully. On his 4th night, everything shifted. Arthur arrived at the break room at 11:15 to clean it and found it already occupied. A woman in scrubs was sitting at the small table at the far end of the room, alone, eating half a sandwich with the focused efficiency of someone who had 40 minutes and intended to use every one of them. A stack of patient charts sat beside her coffee cup. She was somewhere in her late 30s, with a kind of face that had been pretty once and was now something better, defined, lived in, honest. She looked up when Arthur came in, not the flicker-ran-away glance he had gotten used to. She actually looked at him. "You must be the new night guy," she said, not unfriendly, not performing friendliness either, just direct, the way tired people get when they've stopped having the energy for pretense. "I'm Sarah. I work doubles Tuesdays and Thursdays, so you'll see me in here most weeks around this time." She paused. "Fair warning. The coffee machine on this floor has been broken for 6 weeks, and nobody will fix it. so I bring my own from home." She reached across the table and slid a paper cup toward the empty chair opposite her. "Take it. I already had 2, and if I have a third, I won't sleep until Saturday." Arthur looked at the cup. He could not remember the last time a stranger had offered him something with no angle behind it, no agenda, no awareness of who he was or what he was worth. Just a tired woman on her 4th shift of the week sharing her coffee with a new janitor, because it was a decent thing to do. He sat down. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me, it's the cheap stuff," she said, already back in her charts. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then, the way it happens sometimes between strangers late at night when the usual social defenses have gone offline, they started talking. Real talking. Her name was Sarah Okafor. She had been a registered nurse at the Meridian for 6 years, longer than most of the current administrative staff had been in the building. She had come for what she thought would be a 2-year stint after finishing her training, intending to move on to a larger hospital with better pay and a clearer career ladder. She had never left. Why not? Arthur asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in her hands. "Because of Dr. Vance," she said. Not carefully, not the way people say it around Arthur once they know who he is, but plainly the way you state something true. She built something here that I've never seen anywhere else. The patients aren't cases to her. They're people, every single one of them. She used to do rounds with us on Thursday mornings, not because anyone expected her to, just because she wanted to know the patients by name, wanted to know their kids' names, their situations. Sarah paused. "I've worked in 3 hospitals. I've never seen an administrator who actually understood why we were all there." Arthur looked at his coffee cup. "She sounds like someone worth staying for," he said. "She was," Sarah said quietly. And then, after a moment, "She still is. Even now, I stay because this place was hers, and somebody has to hold that." Arthur nodded slowly and said nothing else. He stayed in the break room longer than he needed to. When he finally pushed his cart back into the corridor at midnight, he felt something he had not felt in 13 months. The faint, unfamiliar sensation of not being completely alone. He cleaned the rest of the floor, without stopping. Every Tuesday night after the building cleared, he cleaned Donovan Marsh's office last. Marsh printed everything. Contracts, memos, draft agreements, and dropped them face down in the recycling bin like a man who had never once feared being caught. Arthur photographed each page of the phone he kept in his left sock, transferred everything to an encrypted drive each morning, and put the documents back exactly as he found them. By week 3, he had everything. A signed provisional acquisition agreement between the board and Harwood Capital. Financial projections showing the land value after demolition. A legal memo outlining how to block Arthur from invoking a founder's override he hadn't even known he possessed. And a handwritten note in Marsh's own hand on clinic letterhead that read, "AV still not engaged. Window is open. Move phase 1 to Q1. AV Arthur Vance. Still not engaged." He had seen that handwriting on birthday cards. On a condolence letter slipped under the door of the room where Arthur had sat alone after Claire's funeral before he could face anyone. He filed the photograph, cleaned the rest of the office, said nothing. Then on a Thursday afternoon, for days before he planned to move, everything came forward on its own. He arrived early for his shift and heard noise coming from the corridor near the administrative wing. Claire's office door, locked since the day she died, a small plaque beside the frame, was standing open. Preston was inside with 2 contractors, moving fast and without care. The framed commendation from the city health commissioner. Down. The photographs down. The 3 awards stacked into black refuse bags like broken furniture. And the crayon drawing, the one made by the 7-year-old boy who had spent 11 days in the clinic's care and drawn a woman with a stethoscope and a crown, because she was, he had explained very seriously, a doctor and a queen, lifted off its hook and dropped into the bag without a second glance. Arthur stopped in the doorway. His hands found the cart handle and held it. Preston looked up. "Nothing to see here. Keep moving." Arthur didn't move. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Sarah was coming off a shift, scrubs, lanyard, bag over one shoulder, and she slowed when she saw Arthur standing still in the doorway and then she looked past him into the office, and she stopped completely. She walked in. "What is this?" "Clearance order," Preston said. "Management decision. These are her things." Preston had clearly decided that Word was doing good work for him. Space is being repurposed. Sarah walked to the contractor, holding the bag, and held out her hand. The man looked at Preston. Preston shrugged. "Not worth it." The contractor handed it over. Sarah reached in and found the drawing. She held it flat in both hands, looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Preston. "A child made this for her," she said. "He was 7 years old, and she sat with him every morning for 11 days. You do not throw this away. Put it back." "No." The word hit the room like a door slamming. Preston's expression shifted into something cold and institutional. "You are an employee of this clinic. I'd suggest you remember that." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then she tucked the drawing into her bag, zipped it closed, and held his gaze without blinking. "Do what you want with the rest," she said. "I'm keeping this." She walked out past Arthur without another word. Preston was already on his phone. 20 minutes later, Arthur watched from the far end of the corridor as a woman from HR walked Sarah to a small office near the stairwell. The door closed. It opened 11 minutes later. Sarah came out alone, bag still on her shoulder, face arranged into the expression of someone saving their falling apart for somewhere private. Arthur followed her outside. She was standing on the pavement with her eyes closed, taking slow, deliberate breaths. 6 years, she said quietly. Not to him, to whatever was listening. 6 years, and they walked me out over drawing. Arthur stood a few feet away and watched her. Claire would have loved her. The thought landed in his chest without warning and stayed there. "Keep that drawing safe," he said. She opened her eyes. "What?" "Safe. Don't lose it." He held her gaze. "You're going to want it later." She stared at him, the quiet janitor who had barely said 20 words in 4 weeks, with an expression she couldn't name. He turned and walked back inside, went to his cart, reached into his left sock, took out his phone, dialed. The voice that answered was calm, professional, 19 years in financial crimes and unshockable. "It's Arthur Vance," he said. "I have a full paper trail on a nonprofit board fraud. I need to meet tomorrow. Bring someone from the DA's office." A pause. 8 a.m., she said. "I'll send the address." He hung up, looked down at the name tag on his chest. "Sam." He unclipped it slowly, set it on the cart, looked at it one last time. Then he turned off the corridor lights and walked out of the building. Samuel Grant had just worked his last shift. The morning of the board meeting, Arthur woke at 4:30, not because of grief this time, not because the silence of the house was too loud, or because the photographs on the wall pulled him out of sleep with their quiet weight. He woke because he was ready. There is a particular kind of readiness that has nothing to do with excitement and everything to do with the cold, settled certainty of a man who has waited long enough and prepared thoroughly enough that what comes next is no longer a question. It is simply the next thing that happens. He showered. He dressed slowly and deliberately. The charcoal suit, the white shirt, the dark tie that Claire had bought him for his 60th birthday because she said it made him look like someone who had already won whatever argument he was about to walk into. He had not worn it since her funeral. He wore it today. Marcus was waiting downstairs with the car. He said nothing when Arthur came down, just held the door, eyes forward, professional and steady. But as Arthur got in, Marcus said quietly, without turning around, "She would have liked today, sir." Arthur looked out the window. "Yes," he said, "she would have." They drove in silence. The meeting had been called by Marsh himself, summoned by an anonymous tip, routed through 3 separate channels, so its origin was untraceable, warning of a hostile outside investor moving on the clinic's assets. Marsh had pulled the full board together on 48 hours' notice. He wanted everyone present. He wanted to be prepared. He was not prepared. Arthur walked into the building at 9:58, not through the side entrance, not with a cart or a name tag or a gray uniform, through the front doors, which the security guard held open without being asked because something in Arthur's bearing made it the obvious thing to do. He crossed the lobby in the charcoal suit and the birthday tie, carrying a leather document case in his left hand. Flanked by 2 attorneys from a firm that had handled his personal legal affairs for 22 years, and a woman named Diane Castillo from the city's financial crimes division, who walked with the quiet authority of someone who had heard every excuse and stopped being surprised by any of them. The receptionist looked up, then looked again. Arthur didn't stop at the desk. He knew the building. He had paid for every floor of it. He took the elevator to the second floor, walked down the corridor past the door that still had a small plaque beside the frame, and pushed open the boardroom doors. The room went silent the way rooms go silent when something irreversible has just entered. 7 board members. Donovan Marsh at the head of the table. Arthur's chair, the one that had sat empty for 14 months. With a yellow legal pad in front of him and a coffee cup in his right hand, and the expression of a man about to run a meeting he believed he controlled. That expression lasted approximately 4 seconds. Marsh's face did not collapse all at once. It moved through stages: recognition, confusion, the rapid internal calculation on man trying to locate the exit in a room that has just run out of exits. And then it simply stopped, went still, the way a clock stops. Arthur crossed the room. He set the document case on the table. He pulled out the chair at the head. His chair, Claire's chair, the chair that sat empty for 14 months in a silence nobody in this room had ever actually respected. And he sat down. He looked around the table slowly, taking his time, letting the silence do its work. "I want to be straightforward with you all," he said. His voice was level, unhurried, the voice of a man with nowhere else to be. "I have been in this building every night for the past 3 weeks. The coffee machine on the 3rd floor is still broken, which I imagine none of you knew, and Preston Holloway has the manners of someone who has never once faced a consequence in his life." He paused. "But I did find what I came for." He opened the case. He distributed copies himself, standing, moving around the table, setting a packet in front of each board member with the calm deliberateness of a man who has rehearsed nothing because he needs to rehearse nothing. The acquisition agreement, the financial projections, the legal memo, the handwritten note on clinic letterhead. He set Marsh's copy directly in front of him. Marsh looked down at it. He did not touch it. The room was so quiet that Arthur could hear the ventilation system running above the ceiling tiles. "The provisional acquisition agreement," Arthur said, returning to his seat, "is void. The authority clause in the original charter contains a founder's override provision, one that your legal memo correctly identified and incorrectly assumed I didn't know about. I have filed the override as of this morning. The sale is dead." He folded his hands on the table. What is not dead, what is in fact very much alive and moving quickly, is a question of how 7 people in this room voted to defraud a non-profit institution established in memory of my daughter, and what the appropriate response to that fraud looks like. Diane Castillo opened her own folder. She did not need to say much. She was the kind of person whose presence in a room said most of it for her. What followed took 45 minutes. Marsh spoke twice. The first time to ask a procedural question that Diane answered with a patience that suggested she had answered it many times before. The second time to ask if he could call his attorney. Arthur told him his attorney was welcome to meet him at the financial crimes office, where an appointment had been scheduled for that afternoon. By 11:15, 5 of the 7 board members had signed resignation letters that Arthur's attorneys had prepared and brought in the document case. The other 2 would follow before the day was out, one of them calling Marcus directly within the hour, apparently under the impression that apology and proximity to Arthur's staff were the same thing. They were not. By noon, the building was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. The kind of quiet that follows something that has finally, after a long time, been set right. Arthur sat alone in the boardroom for a few minutes after everyone had gone. He looked at the empty chairs. At the table his daughter had never sat at, because she had always believed that governance was her father's domain and patient care was hers. He looked at the window and the gray autumn light coming through it and the city beyond, carrying on with itself the way cities do, indifferent and continuous. He thought about a crayon drawing of a woman with a stethoscope and a crown. Then he took out his phone and dialed. She answered on the second ring. "I need you to come back to the Meridian," Arthur said. "Not as a nurse. As Director of Patient Services, full authority over clinical staffing and patient care standards, a seat at every meeting that matters, and a salary that will make what they were paying you look like a rounding error." Silence on the line. A long silence. Then Sam? Her voice was careful, uncertain in a way that had nothing to do with the offer. Are you? Arthur, he said. My name is Arthur Vance, and I owe you a proper introduction. Another silence. Shorter. Then quietly, the sound of laughter. Not performed laughter. The real kind. The involuntary kind that escapes when something lands in a way you were not ready for. The janitor, she said. The janitor was... Yes, for 3 weeks, 23 days. And you, she stopped, laughed again. Then, more quietly, you told me to keep the drawing safe. I did. I still have it. I know you do, Arthur said. That's why I'm calling you first. He paused. It belongs back on the wall, above the desk, in the office with your name on the door, if you'll have it. The silence this time was different. Full rather than empty. Yes, Sarah said simply. I'll have it. The Meridian opened its doors the following morning under interim leadership, with a new board in formation and a director of patient services whose first act was to walk into the corner office on the second floor, set her bag down on a reclaimed oak desk, and rehang a crayon drawing above it, a woman with a stethoscope and a crown, made by a 7-year-old boy who had wanted the person who made him feel safe to know that he saw her. Arthur stood in the doorway and watched. Sarah smoothed the corner of the drawing against the wall and stepped back and looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Arthur. It's straight? She asked. Arthur considered it. Slightly left, he said. She adjusted it. Stepped back again. Better, he said. She nodded, turned to the desk. Open her bag. Gotta work. Arthur looked at the drawing one more time. Then he turned and walked back down the corridor, through the lobby and out the front doors into morning. He stood on the pavement outside and looked up at the sign above the door. The Meridian. He had not stood here since the ribbon cutting. Since the day Claire had laughed and cut the ribbon with oversized ceremonial scissors, and then immediately tripped on the step behind her and grabbed his arm to catch herself and said, still laughing, "Don't tell anyone that happened." He had told everyone. She had pretended to be furious for approximately 4 minutes. He stood there now in the charcoal suit and the birthday tie in the quiet of an ordinary Tuesday morning, and he felt, for the first time in 14 months, that the world was not something he was watching through glass. He was in it again. There's a kind of power that needs everyone to see it, that needs a room to go quiet when it enters, needs a title before the name, needs a corner office and a reserved parking space, and a particular deference that money trains people perform. That kind of power is real. It does things. It moves things. Arthur had wielded it for 40 years, and he understood its uses. But there's another kind. The kind that is willing to put on a gray uniform and work the night shift and clean up other people's messes in the dark, not because it has to, but because it understands that truth lives at ground level, that the real measure of anything, any institution, any person, any system, is what it looks like when nobody important is watching. Arthur had gone undercover to gather evidence. What he had not expected was what he found instead. He found a nurse who stayed 6 years past when she could have left because she believed the work mattered more than the pay. He found a 7-year-old's drawing that nobody had thrown away yet. He found, in the break room at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, a paper cup of bad coffee slid across a table by someone who asked nothing in return and understood, in that small gesture, everything his daughter had spent her short life trying to build. The most expensive thing in any room is not the furniture or the view or the title on the door. It is the person who, when they have every reason to look away, chooses to stay. If this story moved you, you know what to do. Subscribe to Echo Tales by Ken. Every week, a new story about the people the world underestimates, and the moment the world finds out exactly how wrong it was. And before you go, I want to know which moment in this story hit you hardest. The finger snap, the drawing, the trash bag, or Sarah walking out of that building with her head up? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.